Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to really get into the nitty-gritty of some of the biggest tech shifts happening globally.
That's right.
And today, well, we're tackling something huge. Digital identity, or DI. A listener asked us to unpack this because, frankly, it's moving so fast.
It really is. And it's arguably one of the most critical, maybe even disruptive areas in the whole digital landscape right now.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to cut through all that complexity, the global standards, the technical stuff like VCs and DIDs, and crucially, the big privacy questions. We want to understand what this new foundation of the digital economy actually looks like.
Yeah, and it's important because digital identity isn't just like your login for an app anymore. It's becoming the cornerstone for accessing,
Yeah.
well, pretty much everything in modern life.
Like what specifically?
Think banking, getting loans, crossing borders, using government services. It's becoming fundamental.
Okay, so right away, that brings up attention, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's the core conflict we see everywhere. We're all pushing for this amazing convenience, right? Seamless, maybe biometric, works everywhere globally.
Sounds great.
It does. But that seamlessness seems to demand pooling huge amounts of our personal data together. And that comes with some really scary, almost catastrophic privacy risks.
Right. So the big question driving us today, the one we really need to get to the bottom of, is this. How do we get that seamless global digital identity system, that interoperability everyone wants, without, giving up our individual control and our security?
Especially when you have governments and massive companies all sort of vying for control over that data. It's a huge question.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Build a foundation. What is digital identity, fundamentally?
Right. So at its core, it's pretty simple conceptually. It's just a digital way of representing a set of claims about something or someone, an entity.
And that entity could be a person, obviously.
Yeah, mostly people. But increasingly, it could be a group, a device, like an IoT thing, or even, an abstract concept like a smart contract needing an identity.
Okay. And the claims about us, the people, they fall into a couple of key types, right? Attributes.
Exactly. You've got your biographic attributes. That's the stuff usually from records name, age, gender, address, the usual things. Pretty static.
Uh-huh.
But then the real power, and maybe the real controversy, comes from the biometric attributes. Fingerprints, iris scans, your voice, even complex facial geometry.
And these biometrics, they're particularly important in certain contexts.
Hugely important, especially in developing nations. Often the traditional paper records, like birth certificates, are patchy or just don't exist for everyone. So the biometric becomes this sort of immutable anchor for identity.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I've seen identity systems categorized by their purpose. The World Bank, ITU, they talk about different types, foundational, functional.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to think about it. It helps understand the design and the risk. There are basically three main types.
What's the first one?
First, you have foundational identity. This is a big one. It's your core legal ID, usually set up by a national government scheme. It's based on what experts call breeder documents.
Breeder documents.
Yeah, things like your original birth certificate or maybe a passport. This foundational ID gives you that single, unique national ID number. It's really the key that unlocks everything else.
Okay, the master key. What's next?
Second is functional identity. This is more specific. It's an identity credential designed for a particular sector or purpose. Like maybe you have one only for accessing your health records or a student ID that only works within the university system.
So the idea is to keep data separate, compartmentalized.
Precisely. It limits the damage if one system gets breached. Your health ID breach hopefully doesn't expose your financial access.
Got it. And the third type?
The third is transactional identity. This one's often temporary, sort of ephemeral. It's just there to make a specific single event easier, like doing a bank transfer or generating a one-time code to log in somewhere.
So understanding these layers helps us see that not all digital IDs are created equal. They have different levels of risk, different lifetimes.
Exactly. You design them differently based on what they're for.
Okay, now let's get into something that sounds a bit sci-fi, but is actually very real. This idea of a digital twin, or maybe the data double. What's that about?
Right. This is where things get, well, a bit concerning. And you see the sheer power of integrating all this data. A digital twin isn't just your name and birthday stored somewhere. It's more like a secondary virtual copy of you built from your data.
A virtual copy?
Yeah, constantly growing, constantly updating based on your activities. It's used for observing you, tracking what you do online, where you go, but also for customizing everything you experience.
Customizing, like, Ads.
Ads, sure, but much deeper. Think personalized pricing, the news you see, even the services you're allowed to access. It's hyper-personalization, driven by this comprehensive data profile.
Okay, I can see the appeal for, say, a company wanting to sell me something. But from the user's side, that sounds deeply unsettling. It's not just the key, the foundational ID, it's the key plus the entire history of every time the lock was turned.
That's a great way to put it. And this creation of this huge, constantly updated, potentially predictive data double is exactly what's causing huge social and political backlash around the world.
Because it's the ultimate target.
It's the ultimate honeypot for hackers, yes.
Yeah.
But it's also the ultimate tool for state surveillance. If one of these integrated systems gets breached, it's not just one password gone, it's potentially your entire interconnected digital life exposed.
And the sensitivity varies, right? Financial data is one thing, but health data,
Yeah.
that feels different.
Oh, absolutely. Health data is incredibly sensitive. The collection of that kind of data into a comprehensive data double is what really keeps privacy experts up at night. The potential for misuse or accidental leakage. It's catastrophic.
You know, discussing these risks, especially around health data and this data double concept, actually brings us to our first partner. They're focused specifically on these systemic health data risks. www.digitalwinrisk.health.
That's very relevant here.
Yeah, if you're concerned about how this secondary virtual version of yourself is being built, particularly with sensitive health info, check them out, www.digitalwinrisk.health. They offer guidance on navigating those specific dangers.
Good to know. So, okay, moving from the risks back to the how.
Yeah.
How do countries actually build these systems? The World Bank seems to have a framework for this, right? 4 steps.
Yeah, what are those pillars? How do you build that initial trust and functionality?
They usually break it down into 4 foundational steps. 1, capturing identity data. That's the enrollment phase, getting people into the system, often using those biometrics we talked about.
Okay, step 1, get the data.
Step 2, storing identity data. This means secure electronic databases.
Yeah.
Not just one, you need robust infrastructure, backups, disaster recovery, maybe geographically spread out.
Right, can't lose it.
Step 3, offering identity credentials. You have to give people something to actually use. Could be a physical smart card, could be a digital ID in an app on their phone, a wallet app.
The credential itself. And finally,
Step 4, offering electronic services. This is crucial. The ID is useless unless there are actual applications and services, government portals, banking apps, whatever, that use the digital ID. That's what proves its value and drives adoption.
okay, so it all starts really with that initial sign-up, the proofing process. That sounds critical.
It absolutely is. Proofing is the formal, often quite resource-intensive process of making sure the person signing up is who they claim to be, establishing that initial trustworthiness.
How do they do that?
It involves checking those breeder documents. We mentioned passports, birth certificates, maybe driver's licenses, and usually collecting high-quality biometric data to link the physical person to the digital claim.
And the strength of that initial proofing, that affects everything downstream.
Directly. The security, the privacy, the reliability of the entire system hinges on how rigorous and secure that initial proofing process is. If you let a fake identity in at the start, the whole data double built on top of it is fundamentally flawed and insecure.
Okay, so we've got the building blocks. Now, let's look at how this is actually playing out across the globe, because it seems like there's no single way countries are doing this, right? The architecture choices are really different.
That's very true. There's definitely no one-size-fits-all model. The choice a country makes, whether they go centralized or federated or maybe even decentralized, that dictates a lot about who holds the power and control over identity data.
So what are the main models we're seeing out there?
Broadly, we see 3 dominant approaches to digital identity governance. First up is the government-driven centralized system.
Okay, what does that look like?
This is where the state basically owns and operates one or more central identity databases. They issue the official EID, and that single ID is used for pretty much all important public and private sector interactions. Think countries like Belgium, Germany, Pakistan is another example. Control is really concentrated with the government.
Right, one central authority. What's the alternative?
Well, a slightly softer approach is the semi-centralized federated system. Here, the government acts more like a regulator or a hub.
How does that work?
Individuals might get to choose from several different trusted identity providers, or IDPs. These could be banks, maybe mobile phone companies. You use their credential, but it's verified through a central government-overseen identity hub or framework. We see models like this in the UK, Australia, Sweden.
So more choice for the user, but still government oversight.
Exactly. The government sets the rules and ensures interoperability, but doesn't necessarily issue every credential itself.
Okay. And then there's the third way, the one that seems to actively avoid a single national system.
That's the decentralized open identity market. The classic example here is the US.
Right. No single national ID card.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Instead, you have this patchwork quilt. State driver's licenses, federal passports, social security numbers used sometimes, plus all the private logins from Google, Apple, banks. Public and private entities kind of create and manage their own separate, siloed identity systems.
Which sounds like it gives you freedom from a central database.
It does, but it creates massive headaches when you need those different systems to talk to each other. Interoperability becomes a real challenge.
It's worth pausing here, though, to just grasp the scale. You mentioned most countries have some form of electronic ID now.
Yeah, the numbers are striking. Something like 160 out of 175 national ID systems globally are now at least partly electronic or EID systems.
Wow. But despite that huge technological push, there's still that massive gap.
That's the paradox. Even with all these systems, the World Bank estimates over 1 billion people worldwide still lack any form of legal, verifiable identity. They're essentially invisible to the system, locked out of banking, healthcare, voting, you name it.
1 billion people, that's staggering.
Okay, let's look at some specific countries. The case studies really bring out this tension between how useful the system is, the utility, and the privacy concerns. Estonia often comes up first.
It does. Estonia is frequently held up as this sort of gold standard, a high-trust digital society.
They have incredibly high adoption, right?
Yeah, something like 99% of residents have the mandatory digital ID card, and usage is really high too. Maybe 70% use it regularly for services.
Now, they use this thing called X-Road and a unique identification number, a UIN. But hang on, how is using a unique number to link data across databases fundamentally different from a centralized system like Pakistan's NADR? Isn't that still linking everything? That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of why Estonia works. It's about the architecture of trust, not just the technology. Yes, they use the UIN, but the key difference is X-Road.
Explain X-Road.
X-Road is this open-source data exchange layer. Think of it like a secure highway for data requests. It allows, say, the tax agency to securely request specific information from the population registry using the UIN. But, and this is crucial, the data itself doesn't get pooled into one giant government database.
Ah, so the data stays where it originated. Health data stays with the health ministry, tax data with the tax agency.
Exactly. The UIN allows secure point-to-point queries through X-Road, but the data remains decentralized in its original silo. X-Road handles the encryption, authentication, the secure pipe, basically. It's not a central lake of data.
Okay, that's a key architectural difference. But what about trust? How do they maintain public buy-in when a unique number is still involved?
Transparency. This is perhaps the real genius. Estonia gives citizens tools to see what's happening with their data. There's the data tracker tool and access logs. You, as a citizen, can log in and see exactly who accessed your UIN-linked data, which agency when they did it, and under what legal basis or for what authorized purpose.
So you can audit the access to your own data.
Precisely. That radical transparency and accountability seems to drastically reduce the fear of unchecked government surveillance that you might get with just a unique number in a black box system. It makes the UIN acceptable because its use is visible and auditable by the citizen.
Fascinating. Okay, let's pivot to a completely different scenario. Pakistan and India. Here, it seems like adoption was driven less by fancy architecture and more by, well, basic necessity, mobile phones and banking.
Absolutely. This is identity driven by very practical needs, especially financial inclusion and meeting Know Your Customer or KYC regulations.
How did it work in Pakistan, for example?
Pakistan leveraged its huge national ID database, NADRA. When you went to get a new mobile SIM card, the mobile operator had to verify your identity. They'd take your fingerprint right there in the shop.
Wow, okay.
And that fingerprint scan was instantly checked online against the NADR biometric database. If it matched your national ID record, your SIM was activated. If not, no phone service.
So getting a mobile phone essentially became the main way people got digitally proofed and linked to the national ID system.
Effectively, yes. And once your identity was biometrically verified for the SIM, that same verified link could then be used to meet the strict KYC rules for opening a mobile bank account, accessing government benefits, paying taxes online, and so on. Mobile enrollment became the gateway to the formal digital economy for millions.
And India's Aadhaar system, the world's largest biometric ID system, had a similar start.
Very similar initial push. Aadhaar verification, including biometrics, was made mandatory for getting new mobile SIMs. This rapidly enrolled hundreds of millions of people. The scale in both countries, driven by this mobile KYC link, is just mind-boggling.
But didn't making it mandatory for things like bank accounts and phones cause huge legal challenges in India? I remember reading about that.
It absolutely did. This mandatory linking became a massive privacy battleground. It went all the way to the Indian Supreme Court in a landmark case, often called the Puttaswamy case.
What did the court decide?
Well, first, in 2017, the court declared that privacy is a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. That was huge. Then, in 2018, they ruled specifically on Aadhaar. They upheld the basic legality of the Aadhaar system itself, acknowledging its role in welfare distribution. But they significantly restricted its mandatory use.
How so?
They ruled that the government could not make Aadhaar mandatory for private services like opening bank accounts or getting mobile phone connections, or even for school admissions. They drew a line, saying it could only be mandated for accessing government subsidies and welfare benefits where the state has a legitimate interest in preventing fraud.
So the court tried to push back against using the foundational ID for everything, enforcing some compartmentalization.
Exactly. It was a major judicial attempt to balance the utility of the system against the fundamental right to privacy and prevent what's often called function creep, where an ID system created for one purpose starts being used for everything else.
Okay, that's a critical point. Now let's look at the flip side. Even when adoption is high, sometimes driven by this necessity, there are real risks, especially for vulnerable groups. Nigeria, Singapore come up here.
Yes, this is a really consistent and, frankly, often quite tragic theme in the reports we looked at. High adoption rates look good on paper, but the way adoption happens matters. Often it's driven by coercion, no ID, no bank account, or your SIM card will be deactivated.
And this disproportionately affects certain people.
It does. The systems, especially when they rely heavily on biometrics, can end up creating new forms of digital exclusion that hit the very people they were supposed to help the hardest.
How does that exclusion actually happen? Is it the tech failing or the policy?
It's often a mix, but frequently it's a technical failure, stemming from maybe a lack of consideration in the policy. We see reports, for instance, of elderly citizens, particularly in places like Nigeria, but also even in tech-savvy Singapore, getting locked out of essential services because of biometric mismatches.
Why would their biometrics mismatch?
Well, think about it. Maybe a manual laborer whose fingerprints have worn down over decades, or maybe the fingerprint scanner used during the initial enrollment years ago was low quality. Now, when they try to verify themselves for, say, their pension, the system says no match.
And what happens then?
To fix it, they often face this incredibly difficult task, having to travel sometimes long distances, maybe when they're unwell, to an understaffed, potentially bureaucratic activation center, just to prove who they are again. It's a huge burden, especially for the poor, the elderly, or those in remote rural areas. The system's failures fall heaviest on the most vulnerable.
That's a harsh reality. And Brazil's new system seems to be trying something different, kind of tiering access based on data sharing.
Yeah. Brazil recently introduced their new national identity card, the CIN. It has this interesting, maybe slightly worrying three-level system: bronze, silver, and gold.
Bronze, silver, gold. What's the difference?
It seems to be about how much data you integrate and how strongly you verify yourself. To get to the highest level, gold, which presumably offers the most seamless access to services, you generally need to do things like confirm your identity, using facial recognition linked to the National Electoral Justice Database.
So linking your face, biometrics.
Right. And often, it also involves linking data from your bank accounts and confirming your usage of various government services through their central gov.br platform. Eventually, you're trading deeper biometric verification and more comprehensive data aggregation for what they promise is maximum security and full access.
That sounds like you're being nudged or maybe even coerced into sharing more data just to make sure the system works reliably for essential things.
That's the risk, isn't it? It normalizes this idea that you have to give up more and more granular data, including sensitive biometrics, simply to function effectively in society. It potentially coerces consent for massive data aggregation.
Okay, so these examples, Estonia, Pakistan, Brazil, they show different ways countries are implementing digital ID, moving things forward, but they're still mostly centralized or maybe federated models.
Largely, yes.
And these models, as we've discussed, have some built-in problems, especially around user control and data security, which is why the tech world seems to be pushing for a completely different approach now, a paradigm shift.
That's exactly right. The traditional models, particularly the purely centralized ones, had some pretty fundamental limitations that became increasingly obvious. Security was a big
The
one.
honeypot problem.
The honeypot problem, exactly. When you have one massive database holding everyone's identity data, like NAD array in Pakistan, or think about the early days of Facebook profiles, it becomes this incredibly attractive target for hackers, for state-sponsored attacks. A single breach could expose millions of detailed data doubles.
Right. And even the federated models, like the first version of Europe's IDI framework, IIDs 1.0,
Yeah.
they didn't fully solve the user control issue, did they? They used protocols like SAML.
Yeah, SAML security assertion markup language was the workhorse for IDIS 1.0. It allowed different players, like your bank acting as an identity provider, IDP, and a website you wanted to access acting as a service provider, IDP, to establish trust and pass authentication information.
But what was the limitation there?
The core issue was trust and control. The service provider still had to place a lot of implicit trust in the identity provider. And critically, you, the user, essentially had to hand over control of your credential assertion to that IDP. The IDP was vouching for you. Plus, private sector uptake was patchy, and getting it to work smoothly across different EU borders was inconsistent. There wasn't true user autonomy or seamless interoperability.
Okay, so this is where we pivot. This is the big technical shift we need to really understand. The move towards self-sovereign identity, or SSI. This seems to be the blueprint for the future.
It really is positioned as the radical departure from those centralized and federated limitations. SSI is built on three core principles: putting the user in control, user autonomy, sharing the absolute minimum data necessary, data minimization, and making the process transparent, transparency.
And how does it work? How does it put the user in control?
In the SSI model, the individual called the holder becomes the actual custodian of their own identity data. They manage it themselves, usually through a secure digital wallet app on their phone or device, not relying on a central issuer or a government database to hold it for them.
Okay, so let's break down the key tech pieces that make SSI possible. We hear these acronyms all the time, DIDs and VCs. Let's start with DIDs. What are decentralized identifiers?
Right, DIDs are a fundamental building block. Think of them as globally unique identifiers, like a phone number or a web address, but with some key differences.
Such as?
Crucially, you create and control your DIDs directly, often using cryptography. They aren't assigned by a central authority. And importantly, the DID itself doesn't contain any of your personal information. No PII.
So it's like a self-owned, anonymous digital address.
That's a pretty good analogy. A public-facing digital address that lets people find you or interact with you cryptographically, but doesn't reveal who you are. And because you can create and use multiple DIDs for different parts of your life, one for work, one for social media, one for banking, it helps prevent your activity from being easily correlated across different services.
So the DID lets me exist digitally without automatically revealing the me behind it. It points to what?
It typically points to something called a DID document. This document contains things like your public cryptographic keys and service endpoints instructions on how others can securely communicate or verify things with you, but again, without accessing your underlying personal data.
Okay, so if the DID is the secure address, what about the actual content of my identity, my driver's license info, my diploma, my proof of age? Where does that live in the SSI world?
That's where the second key component comes in, verifiable credentials, or VCs. VCs are the standardized way to represent those claims about you in a secure digital format.
Standardized by whom?
By organizations like the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C. They've developed specifications, like the VC Data Model v2.0, that define how these credentials should be structured and secured.
And what makes them verifiable?
They're designed to be tamper-evident. They're digitally signed using cryptography by the entity that issued them, the issuer, like the DMV, issuing a digital driver's license. You, the holder, store this VC in your digital wallet. When you need to prove something to someone else, the verifier, like a bartender checking your age, you present the VC.
Okay.
And here's the crucial part. Because the VC is digitally signed by the issuer, the verifier can check that signature cryptographically and confirm the credential is authentic and hasn't been tampered with, without having to contact the original issuer in real time.
Ah, that's the big difference from SAML, right?
Yeah.
In SAML, the verifier had to trust the identity provider's live assertion. Here, the verifier trusts the math, the cryptographic signature on the credential itself.
Exactly. The locus of trust shifts. It moves away from relying on the continuous availability and trustworthiness of the issuer system, and towards reliance on verifiable cryptography. Plus, neither the issuer nor the verifier controls where or how you store your credential. The power stays with you, the holder.
Okay, this is making sense. But how does an ordinary user manage all these DIDs, VCs, the crypto keys, generating the right proofs for the verifier? That sounds complicated.
That's the role of the digital wallet. These are secure applications, usually software on your phone, but could be hardware too, designed specifically for this. The wallet is where you, the holder, securely store your DIDs and VCs.
So it's like my physical wallet, but for digital credentials.
Pretty much. And when a verifier asks you to prove something, your wallet app does the work behind the scenes. It generates a specific, often one-time package of information called a verifiable presentation, or VP. This VP bundles the relevant claims from your VCs along with the necessary cryptographic proofs, like proving you control the associated DID, that the verifier needs. The wallet is the user interface that finally puts you in control, presenting your own data.
Right, the wallet handles the complexity. Now, this whole SSI model, these technical pieces, this isn't just theoretical anymore, is it? Europe seems to be going all in with IATAS 2.0 and this mandatory digital wallet.
Absolutely. IDAS 2.0, which was formally adopted in 2024, is a massive regulatory move. It's the European Union basically saying, okay, we're embracing these SSI principles and we're going to mandate them to achieve genuine, seamless, cross-border digital identity for all our citizens.
And the core of that is the European Digital Identity UDI wallet.
Yes. The regulation requires every EU member state to offer its citizens at least one UDI wallet app. This wallet will allow citizens to securely store and share various digital credentials, not just a national ID, but potentially things like digital driver's licenses, diplomas, travel documents, both online and offline. And importantly, it must support authentication at the highest level of security assurance, what they call low A high.
And IIDS 2.0 also introduced some new types of services specifically designed to support the privacy goals of SSI, like data minimization.
That's right. A key innovation is the introduction of Qualified Electronic Attestation of Attributes, or QEAAs.
QAAs, what do they do?
Think of QEAA providers as newly regulated, highly trusted entities authorized to issue specific, tamper-proof digital statements about certain attributes you possess. For example, a university could become a QEAA provider for issuing verifiable digital diplomas, or a professional body for issuing digital licenses.
And why is that important for privacy?
Because these QEAs are designed to directly enable selective disclosure. Remember data minimization. The goal is to share only what's necessary. With a QEAA-issued credential in your EUDI wallet, you should be able to prove just the specific attribute needed, like I have a valid medical license, or I am over 18, without revealing all the other information that might be on a traditional physical card or document. The QEAAs provide the trusted source for these fine-grained, privacy-preserving claims.
Okay, we have the technical ideal of SSI and the EU pushing towards it, but now we have to get real about the risks. If these systems are implemented poorly, or even if they're implemented well but abused, the potential downsides for privacy and security seem enormous.
They absolutely are. And the primary risk, especially with systems that aren't truly decentralized or that still rely on central verification points, is that catastrophic failure of data aggregation. We talked about the honeypot risk.
Right, creating these irresistible targets.
Exactly. When governments or large platforms mandate the collection and storage of detailed identity verification data, even if it's just for checking against the central registry, they are creating these incredibly high-value targets. A breach doesn't just leak passwords. It can leak verified real-world identities linked to sensitive biometrics or activities.
And this concentration of verified identity data directly fuels things like doxing, right? Exposing people's real identities online.
Doxing is a huge and growing threat enabled by leaky or breached identity systems. Think about it. Centralized digital ID verification often requires linking your real name and details to your online accounts or pseudonyms. If that central link database is breached maybe by hackers, maybe an insider threat from a disgruntled employee, maybe a vulnerability in a third-party company doing the verification checks, then attackers can suddenly connect millions of anonymous online personas to their real-world identities and histories. The protection of pseudonymity is just gone.
That's terrifying. Protecting that personally identifiable information, the PII, seems absolutely critical, especially as these systems start connecting across borders. One weak link could expose so much.
It really could. And managing the compliance around PII protection, adhering to rules like GDPR in Europe or HIPAA for health data in the U.S. becomes incredibly complex in this interconnected environment.
Dealing with those complex data rules and compliance is exactly what our next partner helps organizations with. For navigating this complicated world of PII regulations, many professionals rely on pi.compliancehub.wiki.
Makes sense. You need specialized knowledge there.
Definitely. So if you're working with systems that handle PII, especially across different jurisdictions, pii.compliancehub.wiki is a resource worth checking out to help mitigate those massive compliance and breach risks.
Good to know. Now, beyond accidental breaches or compliance failures, there's the darker side, the intentional use of these integrated identity systems for surveillance and control. Some analysts call this surveillance state capitalism.
Right. We hear about the 4 pillars of digital control. Universal digital identity is the first one, making everyone identifiable. What are the other pieces that enable this kind of control?
Well, according to that framework, after you have universal DI, pillar 1, no anonymity, the second pillar is often cited as central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. The idea is that programmable digital money creates a perfect ledger of every single transaction, eliminating the privacy of cash.
Okay, traceable money. What else?
Pillars 3 and 4 are usually content censorship, controlling what information people can see and share, and anti-anonymity measures, actively targeting encrypted communication tools, VPNs, anything that allows private interaction. Put all 4 together: identifiable people, traceable money, controlled information, and no private communication channels, and you have the potential for an incredibly comprehensive infrastructure for monitoring, scoring, and ultimately controlling behavior.
And the clearest real-world example of this kind of integrated system, at least in development, is probably China's social credit system, particularly the corporate version.
Yes. The corporate social credit system in China is often highlighted as a model of this comprehensive monitoring. It aimed to evaluate the trustworthiness of businesses by systematically combining vast amounts of data, official government records, financial data, legal compliance records, but also real-time tracking of online activities, environmental compliance, even potentially data from AI-powered surveillance cameras.
And they use the score for what?
To determine access to loans, government contracts, favorable regulatory treatment, market access. Basically, the score can significantly impact a company's ability to operate and succeed. And there are plans, or at least discussions, about extending similar scoring concepts to evaluate foreign entities interacting with China, effectively using this identity and behavior infrastructure as an economic gatekeeper.
Wow. And the technology enabling all this surveillance goes way beyond just collecting database records, doesn't it? We mentioned biometrics, but AI seems to be taking it to another level.
Oh, absolutely. The integration of AI is making biometric surveillance exponentially more powerful and pervasive. We see widespread deployment of facial recognition systems, even though studies, including some cited in our sources, point to significant error rates, sometimes as high as 30%, particularly in non-ideal conditions or for certain demographic groups.
But it's not just faces anymore.
No, what's perhaps even more insidious is the rise of behavioral biometrics. AI systems are now being trained to identify individuals based on how they act. Their typing rhythm and speed, the way they move their mouse, their walking gait captured by cameras, the cadence and unique patterns in their voice.
Things you can't easily change or hide.
Exactly. Unlike a fingerprint you might try to obscure, these behavioral patterns are deeply ingrained. This moves identity verification away from static data points, like your name or ID number, towards constant, real-time profiling based on how you behave. It's a profound shift.
Okay, so given these massive threats, aggregation, surveillance, linkability, how do the technical systems, especially the SSI ones, try to fight back? Let's talk about secure authentication and the nuts and bolts of implementation.
Right. Robust security is non-negotiable. Authentication has to be strong. That means moving beyond simple passwords and mandating multi-factor authentication, MFA, wherever possible. Combining something you know, like a password, something you have, like a phone or hardware key, and something you are, like a biometric.
And underpinning all of this is cryptography.
Absolutely critical. You need strong, standardized end-to-end encryption for data in transit. Things like TLS 1.3 are the baseline now. You need strong digital signatures to guarantee the authenticity and integrity of those verifiable credentials authentication tokens we talked about. And you need mechanisms to prevent specific types of attacks, like using nonces.
Okay, explain the nonce again. Why is that simple thing so important?
A nonce is basically just a number used once. It's a random, unique value that's generated for a specific cryptographic transaction, like an authentication request. Think of it as a unique, single-use ticket for that one interaction.
And its purpose?
Its main purpose is to prevent replay attacks. That's where an attacker might intercept a valid encrypted authentication message, like your login token, and try to replay it later to gain access themselves. Because the original message contained a unique nonce, and the server knows that nonce has already been used or has expired, it rejects the replayed message. The nonce ensures that authentication tokens are temporally unique and can't be reused, adding a crucial layer of security.
Got it. And besides basic crypto, are systems implementing features specifically designed to reduce the risk of data being linked across different services? We saw India trying this with Aadhaar after the court ruling.
Yes, that's a key principle, minimizing unnecessary linkage. After the Supreme Court limited mandatory Aadhaar use, the system introduced features like virtual ID and tokenization.
How do those work?
Instead of giving your permanent, unique 12-digit Aadhaar number to every single service provider, like your mobile company, your gas company, etc., you can generate a temporary virtual ID or a tokenized version of your number for each specific interaction.
So the mobile company gets one token, the gas company gets a different one.
Exactly. This means that even if both those companies suffer a data breach, the leaked tokens can't be easily linked back to your single core Aadhaar number, nor can the companies easily correlate your activity between them using the Aadhaar number as a common key. It's a practical way to implement data minimization and reduce linkability after the foundational identity is established.
Which brings us back to that gold standard concept we mentioned, privacy by design, PBD. Embedding privacy right from the start. The core idea seems to be ask for less data.
That's the fundamental tenet. PBD means building systems where privacy isn't an add-on, but a core requirement from day one. Technologically, in the SSI context, this relies heavily on enabling those two key features we touched on earlier, both powered by cryptography: selective disclosure and unlinkable disclosure.
Let's really nail these down because they seem crucial to delivering on the privacy promise of SSI. Define selective disclosure again, maybe with that classic example.
Right. Selective disclosure is your ability, as the holder, to reveal only the specific piece of information that is strictly necessary for a transaction, often just a yes or no answer, without revealing the underlying raw data. The classic example is buying alcohol.
Okay.
Instead of showing your driver's license, which reveals your name, address, date of birth, license number, maybe organ donor status, all sorts of sensitive PII, you would present a verifiable credential from your wallet. This VC, issued perhaps by the DMV, would allow your wallet to cryptographically prove only the single claim. Age is over 21, yes or no. The bartender, the verifier, gets the legally required confirmation but learns absolutely nothing else about you.
Right.
That's selective disclosure in action, minimum necessary data.
Okay, very clear. Now, what about unlinkable disclosure? That sounds even more powerful for preventing tracking.
It is. Unlinkable disclosure tackles the problem of correlation. Even if you're using selective disclosure, maybe you use the same over 21 credential at 10 different bars. Could those bars, or someone observing them, figure out it's the same person making all those purchases? Unlinkable disclosure aims to prevent that.
How?
It uses more advanced cryptographic techniques, like zero-knowledge proofs or perhaps blinded signatures. The goal is to ensure that each time you present a credential, or a piece of information derived from it, the presentation looks unique and cannot be cryptographically linked to any other presentation you've made, even if it's based on the same underlying credential.
So the 10 bars couldn't collude and say, the same cryptographic identifier bought drinks at all our locations.
Exactly. Each presentation would be unlinkable to the others, protecting your anonymity across different interactions and preventing different verifiers from building up a correlated history of your activities. It's about breaking the data trail between different services.
This intense focus on protecting the data, especially biometric data and these behavioral patterns, it really highlights the stakes.
It does. As we increasingly rely on these deeply personal, often biological attributes for verification, protecting that raw data becomes absolutely critical.
And that's where ensuring privacy in this new era becomes so urgent. It's a good moment to mention our final partner, biometric.myprivacy.blog.
Very timely.
If you're thinking about how to safeguard your personal space, your unique biological and behavioral data, in a world moving towards biometric keys, biometric.myprivacy.blog offers insights and strategies for protecting what's becoming your ultimate digital identifier.
So pulling all these threads together, the tech, the risks, the different models, the big push now globally is for interoperability.
Making all these different systems actually talk to each other seamlessly?
Exactly. Because if every country, or even every sector within a country, builds its own incompatible digital ID system, we just recreate the physical world's problems of incompatible passports and siloed databases, but in digital form. It creates huge friction for international travel, for global trade, for cross-border services. It's like every country having a different gauge railway track. Nothing connects easily.
Right. And we're seeing that major initiatives like the EU's EUDI wallet are kind of forcing the issue, creating a domino effect.
That seems to be the dynamic. When a large economic bloc like the EU mandates a specific interoperable standard based on SSI principles, it creates enormous pressure on other countries and trading partners to align. Nobody wants to be left behind or unable to easily interact with the European digital market. Successful national or regional efforts can definitely nudge reluctant nations towards cooperation.
So geopolitics and economics are really driving the need for common standards.
Absolutely. The path forward really requires global alignment, or at least regional alignment, on the core technical standards. That means countries adopting frameworks set by international bodies like the UN, the World Bank advising on best practices, and crucially, technical standards bodies like the W3C defining the protocols.
And the focus for those technical standards has to be.
Things like ensuring the systems are extensible, can adapt to future needs, provide non-repudiation, you can prove a transaction actually happened and who participated, and create tamper-proof records. This is exactly why those W3C specs for the Verifiable Credentials Data Model v2.0 and for decentralized identifiers, DADs, are so vital. They aim to provide that common technological language.
But let's be critical here. The W3C can propose these beautiful privacy-preserving SSI standards, but what are the real roadblocks to getting governments worldwide, many of whom like centralized control, to actually adopt them?
That's the core political friction, isn't it? The W3C standards, particularly the VC model with selective and unlinkable disclosure, are designed to empower the user and minimize data collection. That inherently means governments adopting them have to cede some control.
Control over the data architecture, control over surveillance capabilities.
Precisely. Centralized systems give governments more direct visibility and potential control. Moving to a truly holder-centric SSI model using W3C standards fundamentally restricts that surveillance capability and data aggregation power. So the biggest challenge isn't the technology itself, it's the political will of states to embrace a model that reduces their own power in favor of individual privacy and control. That's why adoption is often slower than the tech would allow, and why we sometimes see bilateral agreements instead of full multilateral adoption of the purest SSI principles.
Okay, we've focused a lot on government systems, but for this to really take off and be useful day to day, the private sector and just mobile phones seem incredibly important.
Oh, completely essential. Mobile devices are the key hardware platform for all of this. They put the digital wallet, the biometric sensors, the secure enclave for keys right into billions of people's pockets.
And they leapfrog older infrastructure.
Massively. In many developing countries, mobile phones allow digital ID systems to bypass decades of missing paper-based records or lack of reliable internet access points. Verification can happen right on the device or via the mobile network. And beyond the hardware, you absolutely need private sector buy-in.
Why?
Because that's where most of the daily utility comes from. Banks need to accept the digital ID for opening accounts and meeting KYC rules. Airlines and travel companies need to integrate it for smoother journeys. Mobile providers themselves are key players. Widespread adoption only happens when the digital ID makes everyday tasks easier and more secure across both public and private services. That biometric boarding pass or using your digital wallet for travel is a perfect example of this public-private integration starting to happen.
Right. Okay, let's zoom out for a moment. For someone listening to this, hearing all the technical terms, JSON LD, Divid methods, SAML assertions, TLS 1.3, nonces, VCs, VPs, it can feel overwhelming. What does the sheer density of all this technical detail tell us about where we are with digital identity?
It tells us this isn't a theoretical debate anymore. This is happening now. It's a deeply complex, active engineering challenge being tackled by thousands of developers, policymakers, and companies around the world.
It's not just concepts.
No. When regulations like IDOS 2.0 come out, they don't just say use SSI, they specify how. They mandate specific authentication flows, like using the authorization code flow from OAuth 2.0, specific data formats, like structuring VCs using JSON LD so they're machine-readable and linked data compatible, and strict security protocols, like insisting on TLS 1.3 for encryption. The technical jargon isn't just jargon. It reflects the incredibly high stakes and the precision required to build identity systems that are secure, interoperable, and hopefully privacy-preserving at a fundamental cryptographic level.
So, boiling it all down then, what does this complex, rapidly evolving landscape mean for us as individual citizens? What's the big picture for freedom and privacy going forward?
I think the fundamental question, the hinge upon which the future of personal freedom in the digital age turns, is this. Who ultimately controls the credential architecture? Are we building systems where governments and maybe a few giant corporations maintain centralized oversight, allowing them to link our data and potentially surveil our activities? Or are we successfully building and adopting truly self-sovereign systems based on those W3C principles, where the individual user is the final controller, the final arbiter of what data gets shared, when it gets shared, and with whom?
That tension seems to be the defining battleground.
It absolutely is. The answer to that question will determine how much real agency and privacy we retain as we move deeper into the digitally mediated economy of the next decade. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really underscores that central tension, doesn't it? This global push for universal digital ID holds the promise of incredible convenience, breezing through airports, accessing services instantly. But at the same time, it clearly introduces these huge systemic risks of surveillance and loss of control if privacy isn't digged in right from the start by design.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that the technology itself, things like verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers, does offer powerful tools to protect privacy. Mechanisms like selective disclosure and unlinkable disclosure are technically feasible and incredibly promising.
But the tech isn't enough on its own.
No, the best cryptographic mechanism in the world doesn't help much if the policies governing its use or the underlying trust framework still lead to centralized control or data hoarding. Ultimately, whether these systems truly empower individuals or become tools for control is less a technological question and much more a question of policy, law, and societal trust. Are we building decentralized networks of trust or just reinforcing centralized power with fancier tech? That's the challenge.
Which leads us to a final, perhaps slightly unsettling thought for you, the listener, to mull over after this deep dive. We seem to be moving rapidly towards a world where genuine anonymity, the ability to be unseen or unidentified online, is becoming a kind of luxury good. Something maybe only accessible to those with the deep technical skills or the financial resources to actively fight for and protect it.
hmm
So, given that trajectory, and given the incredible advances in behavioral biometrics and AI analysis that we discuss, systems that can potentially identify you just by the way you walk or type or talk, how long do we really have until the way you authenticate yourself, your unique behavioral signature, becomes the ultimate, perhaps unavoidable, digital identifier? Could that effectively eliminate the last practical vestiges of online privacy, making that data double truly inescapable regardless of the cryptographic tools we invent?